Hey there, I'm Scott, and this is Tangents. Well, made one of these not too long ago, and I'm making a second one today. I think the last one was Friday. Today is Monday, the 7th of June, 2021. It is currently 7:40 a.m. where I am. The keynote of WWDC 2021 is coming up in a couple of hours. I mentioned that last time. I'm not going to talk too much about it today. It's crazy though. I guess Steve Jobs' last Steve Note, his last WWDC, was 10 years ago today, or at least 10 years ago, give or take, modulo whatever variation there is in the day of the week that they happen to have that. It's pretty remarkable how fast time flies. I mean, I think about my dog Zona, and she was with me like 13 years, I think. And you start doing the math on that, and you're like, oh shit, it's been, I don't even know, I think it's been like 5 years, 4 or 5 years since she died. And it's just like, it fucks with you. It really is hard to wrap your mind around some of this stuff. It's just, like my dad died just before, or actually I guess almost exactly on my birthday, right after turning 21. And so more than half a lifetime ago now, which is just, it's crazy. At some point, barring catastrophe, I will be older than he was then, which is hard to fathom. And, continue on. It also, I think a lot about like kids, having kids and all this kind of stuff. My partner, not interested in kids, and I have mixed feelings about that. I have complicated feelings about that. We've talked a lot about it. There's a certain thing, certain, where you kind of think like, well, okay, even if we were both interested, there's a chance where one or both of you can't do it. So it's not like it automatically is changing things relative to being with someone who was like gung-ho about it. But it does kind of close a door. And the fact that it does, it's a weighty thing that I think about. And I certainly also think like how old I was when my parents were my current age. And if I had a kid, that somebody who I dated very briefly, or maybe not even, almost dated, and then a couple of things just didn't quite work out. Just weird, bad luck, basically. When I was about 21, she has a kid, a daughter, and I'm out of touch now because I'm not on Facebook anymore. It's kind of a shame. I love the fact that there are certain things to be said about like there are people that you meet and would never see again, and that's fine. And the fact that you get connected to them and then you stay connected with them for years or decades, I don't know if it's good or bad. I like it overall, but I know a lot of people who have kind of mixed and complicated feelings about it. Personally, I overall like it. I found Facebook to be a net positive in my life on a personal level. I got to be in touch with a lot of people who I would otherwise have completely drifted apart from. And she is one of those people. And so met her in Hawaii. We were both grad students at the same time. And she had a daughter like a year after, after we almost dated. So, like very close to where we almost dated. She was with some other dude and got pregnant. And, I have a long, weird thing actually. Probably more than a handful of cases where I've dated someone. Not that I've dated that many people, but still a handful of people. Thinking of names, I don't want to name names here, but at least 5 that I can think of. I dated them, and then we broke up, and then within a couple of months, they were pregnant and had a kid, which is just, mind-blowing. It's like, and then you think also, Like, if I would have gotten pregnant, I would have kids that are various ages, which is crazy. And you think also, like, if I would have, this one that I'm talking about from Hawaii, if we would have been together and I got her pregnant, I would have a daughter who's in college now. And that's like, it fucks with you in a way that, I don't know, I don't feel a lot of things about aging. You know, there's certainly things biologically that I'm noticing. You know, I can no longer, like when you're 21, you chop a finger off and it grows back. Almost like the same day. It's freaky how fast you heal. And now, you know, I get injured and it takes a while. I fell on my bike probably like 2 years ago now, and I still have a discoloration on my arm from it. Was just, you know, road rash basically. I've had that before and nothing. And this was like, you know, it's probably a permanent feature of my arm. It's slowly fading, but it's definitely there. And it's, you know, you do feel biological differences. My vision has definitely degraded, although it's still pretty decent. My hearing, I think, is degraded, although it's still pretty decent. Yeah, and it's kind of funny because in both cases they're better than a lot of people's, but they're still not as good as mine used to be. So it's like I feel a loss even though I'm still kind of ahead. But the thing that I really feel about aging, more than anything, is that it's given me a different perspective on, I guess, other people. And one of the things here is like when you're, I remember when I was like in high school, and I would see people, not even in college, just like seniors in high school, and they looked so adult. And then you get to undergrad, and even the seniors in high school at that age, when I was an undergrad, looked like little kids. But the people my age and a little bit above look pretty adult. And then you progress through and you're like senior year, 4th year of undergrad, and now the entering freshmen look like little kids. And you can see where this is going. You get to be in graduate school, and even the seniors in undergrad look like little kids. And now the people in graduate school, you know, look not quite like little kids in all cases, but a lot of them definitely look kiddish. You know, you can see there's an element of that still. And some of them totally do. And so, you know, I look at that and you just feel this aspect of it to some extent. But you also, I think when I was younger, my perspective was more like you'd see somebody, and it's not that they were always that age in your mind. I mean, obviously you rationally know that they were once much younger, they're going to be much older, but you don't really have a palpable sense of that as much. And now, and you know, I'm not even that old, but I mean, I've gotten enough of a snapshot of that, both in myself and people that I know, that you kind of see the progression, the trajectory. You know, you don't just see, or I don't just see people in the snapshot that they're in. I'll see people and I'm like, oh, I'll see a 40-year-old and I'm like, oh, I can picture what you were like when you were 20 or when you were a little kid. And you'll see a little kid sometimes and you'll be like, oh, I know exactly the fucking adult you're going to be. And I don't think it's just like, you know, wild ass guess. I mean, you can see a lot of how people change, how people stay the same. And there's, by and large, not universally, but by and large, people have a sort of predictable trajectory in life. And I think there are a lot of things also, like, it's not that people don't change massively, but for the most part, I think the nucleus of stuff that defines who we become is there early on. And even if it might not be obvious where it's going, even if it might not be obvious in the moment what it's going to lead to, with the perspective of time and history, you can go back and say, oh, yeah, I see where this person did X, Y, and Z. And that's kind of what led to here. Kanye, yeah. I don't want to talk too much about him or disparage him or anything. But, his mom, PhD, professor, very accomplished, and you can see I'm sure she had very good intentions with him and raised him in a certain way that was kind of like, you can do anything, you're great, you're awesome, all this stuff. And she ended up essentially kind of creating a monster. And I don't think she did it on purpose. And, I do think he's a tortured man. I don't think, I do not remotely envy this dude. And I think also, like, there's a fundamental kind of insecurity there because I think when people tell you that, part of you believes it, and then there's a part of you that doesn't. And I think there's a big part of him that does not believe that he's even adequate. And you can see, like, it kind of leads to overcompensation. And so I think that is an aspect of what's going on there. I think also his mom kind of set him up. I mean, this is a thing, like, if you have kids, there are so many things you can and will do wrong. And those things nucleate stuff that will have ripples through their entire life, by and large. I mean, people, again, you can have a reckoning. You can be on a trajectory and have a sort of come to Jesus moment, metaphorically speaking, I would hope. And then, change things deeply. But most people don't do it. Very few people have such a thing unless there's some kind of a crisis in their life. If they're an addict and they get to the point where they're essentially like, I'm either going to die and spiral out of control or I'm going to make some big changes. That's a thing. You get people who, I don't know, are getting very unhealthy or morbidly obese or doing whatever, and they see the trajectory they're on. They're lifelong smokers. And they get to the point where they're like, I can see where this is going. And if I don't make a change, this is going to be my future. I don't like that future. And then they inflect and change fundamentally that aspect, which was formerly something that almost defined them. It was something that permeates every aspect of their life. And I think it's a thing that you do see more and more in terms of it being an exception, not the rule, because by and large, again, people follow a relatively predictable trajectory. And, the events that guide them from there do change things. But most people, you can see, if not a straight line, a kind of largely uninflected curve from their childhood through the entire trajectory of their life. Now, I recently, on Friday, watched Bo Burnham's special. And several things, many thoughts actually came to mind here. One was certainly, holy shit, like, I mean, to me, this is, I'm not going to say it's like his magnum opus because I hope he does other things, but it is sort of a singular accomplishment that, without overstating it, I feel like it's on the order of like a Hamilton kind of thing. Like, it was really good. I don't want to oversell it and make you disappointed if you haven't seen it yet, but really fucking good. Don't go in with huge expectations, but it's amazing. And it's also amazing to think this is a dude who spent like a year plus on his own in his little room recording stuff, and he made something that is just extraordinary. It's funny, it's touching, it has a lot of things where he's making criticisms of himself and of of the people that are watching and enjoying, and of his fans, and he's making like pretty open statements about his mental health. He's making pretty and he's doing it in a way that both is very revealing and also humorous. And it's kind of the layers of the juxtaposition there. I found it very impressive. I found it really, I knew it was going to be good. I was very, I'm not going to say it was incredible, but it was kind of incredible. I mean, it was, kind of an extraordinary thing. Not to oversell it. Again, I really don't want to ruin your experience of it by telling you like, it's better than Hamilton. And then you see it and you're like, well, it was just as good as Hamilton. It wasn't better, so it's disappointing. No, it's very good. If you haven't seen it, watch that shit. It's on Netflix. It's quite good. There are a ton of people, shit ton of videos, and I'm not going to comment on them or comment on the special beyond what I just said. But there are a lot of people criticizing it and kind of, I guess, the title that I'm going to put on here is going to be Bo. So I'm guilty of the same thing. People know what how the swell is going, what the waves are doing, what the wind is doing. And so you kind of, on YouTube, you put that stuff in, and then it sort of steers things, it helps things. It's not that I even need, and it's kind of weird because this is not my, my goal in doing this is not to have like shit tons of people watch it. But at the same time, there's a part of me that's kind of like, well, it'd be nice if more people watch it. And so, and also you kind of think of it as a puzzle a little bit. There are a couple of people, interesting thing, a couple of people that I've watched start a YouTube thing. And like the one that springs to mind is Blondie Hacks. I love her. She does these machining videos like once a week. And they're kind of like hobbyist machining stuff. And, I don't miss an episode of what she does. And it's kind of cool, it's kind of funny. And you watch these things and you're like, this is, in fact, I'm a patron of hers. Only $5 a month. But then I saw the list of patrons on, the ending credits. I look at her Patreon page, Patreon, whatever the fuck it's called. I go there and it's like a couple thousand people. And you start doing it like the lowest tier is $3 a month. At a minimum, she's pulling in like 60 grand, I think, from this thing. And you start thinking like, wow, that's without sponsorships or any of this other stuff. There's certainly, an element of it'd be kind of cool to just do some shit that you like. And obviously it's a lot of work. I don't want to downplay that. But, do some shit that you like and do something that's kind of fun and have that almost pay for itself. It would be really fucking nice. So I do see appeal to that. The What About It guy, Felix. I have mixed feelings on he's getting, it's an interesting thing also. He seems to be kind of falling off. But over the course of a little bit, say like a year, he went from a very nascent YouTube thing that was just kind of dorky, and it has a weird, like, What About It, I'm sure in German makes sense. In English, it just feels off. But he turned it into a really popular YouTube channel, and one that I never miss an episode of. And when he does these, he does videos like they're watch parties essentially for Falcon Heavy or Starship launches, this kind of stuff, Falcon 9 launches. And I guess not Falcon Heavy because that predated his thing. But they're watch parties for these things, and you look at it and you're like, yeah, I watch it, I like it, and it's worth watching. It's kind of amazing that you can do that, and it's become something where it's actually enough of a revenue stream for him. I think that's like his gig, or at least it could be. And it's pretty interesting how that works. But going back to Bo, I've followed for quite a while. I've watched a lot of his videos, and I don't know if all Boy Scouts are gays, but they can probably tie the knot in like 50 different ways. But it's, I'm Bo, yo. It's not the, anyway, getting very self-conscious even doing that. And also I don't want to, insult people by doing his stuff, but I've followed him for a while. And you can see with him the seeds of stuff that he's talked about now. You can really see in many ways, like that thing that I was talking about where you can kind of look at the trajectory of someone. You'll see a woman who is obviously, she's seen a lot of sun, she's kind of a little bit past middle age, but you can see the sort of 20-year-old college party girl that she used to be. And, you can feel that path that's pretty, I'm not saying it's like a ballistic trajectory, but it's basically like just a predictable path. With Bo, in some sense, you can see those nuclei of things that got him where he is. I guess like 5 years ago, he had really bad just panic attacks on stage to the point where he quit performing on stage. And like one of his things in the, not to step on it, but one of his things in this episode, the special, he's talking about that, and then he's talking about how he kind of like was working on himself, and then, you know, like last year, in January, got to the point where he's like, you know, better. And then he didn't even have to talk about what happened next, because it's like, shit, you know. You know. So, and then you'll see, like, you go back and you'll hear him talking about his declining mental health and all this kind of stuff, and it's a joke, but it's also real. And, you know, he's talking about how he loves and hates the audience, and, you know, he doesn't maybe like shouldn't be talking about stuff that's too connected to, you know, or too deep or stuff, you know. But as long as he makes it rhyme and sound good, then people will keep like just sort of cheering him on. And it's interesting because it's really hard to pull this off, I think. It has self-awareness. It has an element of really exposing yourself, but also really not. And somebody could watch it and not see below the surface and enjoy it and feel like it was great. And then you can also see multiple layers below the surface. And it's like simultaneously, and this is the thing about the special, it's very good, but it's also, you know, kind of, it's got some heavy stuff in it. And some of that heavy stuff is also talking about, like, you know, being a cis hetero white dude. And you're like, oh, well, you know, for hundreds of years we've been centered and maybe we should just shut the fuck up. Nah, fuck that. I'm not gonna, yeah. I mean, that's one of the things he says. And he's talking about things like that, you know, the audience can feel about themselves. And you know, like if you're someone like me, it's like simultaneously, or he makes a lot of comments on content creation and the internet. And he's got a great song on it, actually. And it's one of these things where it's also like he is part of the thing that he's commenting on, very derisively in many ways, but also like you're kind of trapped in the same thing that you're criticizing. And it's, I don't know, it's not something that I've seen done as well probably ever before. And so you can kind of see, like if you look at him now, he looks very different. You know, he's got like a beard, and through the special, his facial hair grows quite considerably. You can see sort of degradation in that sense. You can see variations of how he's acting and this kind of stuff. But you can also see, like, or rather hear, parts of his voice sound very similar to the stuff that he was doing when he was like 18. And also at the same time, like the dude's only 30. For 30, he's a very old 30. And I don't mean that in an insulting way. It's just you can see that he's gone through a lot of shit. You can feel, you can understand that he's gone through a lot of shit and a lot of struggle. And that kind of stuff ages you. And it also, you know, if you looked at him younger, you could totally see this as a possibility, I guess. But it's not the trajectory that you would expect. It's definitely, if you're kind of projecting forward from who he was at that time when he was a kid to the present or the future, you would not gather that he would be the same dude that he looks like. And when I say looks like, I mean obviously many layers there and the sort of, you know, the depth that he has. But you do get the hints of it. You know, you looking back with the benefit of hindsight, you can go back and see, oh shit, all this stuff was here. And not only that, he basically told people, literally, directly, the things that were going on. But at the moment, you're like, oh, it's kind of a joke. And, you know, obviously you're not thinking, oh, that's just a joke. But you mostly think, it's kind of a joke. He's like taking something that's real, but exaggerating it. And then you realize, oh shit, you know, probably true that he was exaggerating it, but also, you know, there's some reality there. Which also, I mean, he speaks pretty openly about suicide, being a little bit suicidal. It's like, you kind of think he's joking, but also, you know, I mean, if he did seriously consider it, I would say, I'd be almost surprised if he hasn't considered it. And if he did it one day, which I really hope he won't. But it wouldn't be like, you'd look back and you'd be like, oh yeah, you can kind of see where that was coming from. It's interesting because I think about, like Robin Williams. You can see in retrospect that, but he never really showed that aspect of himself. So you kind of, which probably is part of how it gets as far as it does, because if you're hiding that and if you're just completely putting those layers on, people can't even see not that people can help you in this kind of thing in any case, but if you need like real mental help, you need therapy or pharmacology or anything like that, even if those things would help, which is not at all guaranteed. But if you need that stuff and you mask it, you don't show that you have something seriously wrong, how's anybody gonna know? And then it just comes up as a surprise. And again, Robin Williams, I mean, you can kind of go back and you see like the little inklings of stuff, and you feel like, how did people not see this at the time? And yet you can also totally understand how people didn't see it because you didn't see it. With Bo, you get a hint of it, but it's, I don't know, totally watch it. That was probably more, given that I'm calling this Bo, probably still more time than I wanted to spend on it, but it's just an interesting thing. I did want to refer back to a couple things that I talked about the last episode, the Apple Store. Specifically, like I was going into these guys who were there, and they were, very cocky and kind of pretending that they knew everything about the stuff, which I found very off-putting. Even if you actually know stuff, I don't find it great when you're, sort of cocky and up your own ass about it. But when you don't know shit and you're super overconfident about like, oh yeah, I totally know this. I don't want to comment on a specific person, but there's a person that I know who, and granted, this is a person who's very young. I'm sure over the course of time this will change, but has a lot of that kind of, like, oh, of course I knew that, and similarly to, and I'm not saying it's like a mental health thing, but if you think that you know everything, then you're guaranteed not to learn. It's pretty hard. So they were talking about the, again, the image, well, I was talking about the image sensor, the image shift sensor, and there are several other differences, incidentally, between the 12 Pro Max and the 12 Pro cameras, but never mind that now. They were very certain they're exactly the same camera in the two different sizes. And it's just like, why are you guys, it's not even a lie. It's like, obviously, I'm asking about this stuff because I kind of knew about it, and the main thing I was trying to get to is like, I know the cameras are different. This is where I was coming from. I know the two cameras are different. Is it worth getting the ridiculously huge phone for the better camera? And they're like, oh no, they're both exactly the same camera, which I think is a testament to how good both cameras are that you can't really tell. And I have seen reviews where there are, good and bad things about both cameras. It's not like a complete slam dunk in one way or the other. There are things that are actually better about the smaller phone's camera. But, like I think more surface area per, I think there's more surface area for the sensor. I could be wrong, per pixel. And in the smaller one, or at least, there are obviously like multiple sensors and all this stuff. You can't really apples to apples it, but never mind that now. The thing I wanted to talk about was specifically something that I brought up with them, which annoyed me. And it was either force touch or 3D touch. I don't know what they called it. But in my XS, there was a thing where you could have your hand anywhere on the keyboard and push with a little bit, and it would move the cursor. It was actually really nice. I liked it a lot. And I was asking them about that. And they're like, oh, well, one of the two dudes. It's like, oh, well, it's like when some people got upset about the headphone jack going, asshole. Headphone jack going, net positive. Taking the CD or DVD drive out of a MacBook to make it thinner, lighter, all this stuff. Net positive. I had no objection to that stuff. And I don't like also that you're kind of like framing it in this way. That's like, this Force Touch thing was actually kind of a big deal because I use that all the time. I want to go around and like move the cursor in something that I've typed. And I ask them like, you know, I've got this huge URL here. How do I move in this? And they're like, well, I guess you just can kind of go like that. Yeah. And then I was explaining like, you know, if you have the Force Touch, then you can just push here with some force and then do it. Turns out Apple, being Apple, has actually solved this. And basically what they do is if you do an extended press on the space bar, it works pretty much the same way it used to work with force anywhere in the keyboard. And I got used to that within a few hours of having the phone. Not a big deal. Works pretty well. And then you start thinking like, if these guys, I don't know that they knew that. If they would have known that and explained it to me, and both of these dudes are sitting there talking to me. One of them's like a camera geek and the other one's just like a Apple guy. And you're like, in retrospect, I almost wish I could just go back there and be like, guys, first off, this is not a thing, like the reason that it went away is not because it was saving something or anything like this. It was a licensing issue. Like the company that owned the patent on this basically said, you know, like pay us an unreasonable sum of money or take it out of your phones. And then Apple's like, fuck you, we're just gonna take it out of the phones. We don't give a fuck. So they had it for a brief period, lost it. And yeah, I have a lot of mixed feelings on patents, to be honest. Like intellectual property, I really believe if you've done the work, you should be able to be rewarded for it. I don't like people just copying shit and ripping stuff off, especially without attribution and all of this, kind of shitty. But at the same time, you know, it's an interesting thing. If you have done that and you haven't really done anything with it, there's certainly a level where Apple should probably be paying you a little bit for it. And a little bit per phone, like a penny a phone, at the scale of iPhones, that's enough revenue to probably take that company into just a ridiculous, like to the point where they're like, I don't even know what to do with this fucking money. But they got greedy. And so you have this combination of, well, now all the users lose this thing, which to Apple's credit, this thing with the space bar, if you know about it, it works really well. I've noticed that, you know, like a slightly extended touch on places, very quickly you adapt to that. The only part that I didn't like when I switched to the Mini, which I got rid of, was, well, there were other things about that phone, but with this Force Touch thing, I didn't like that I couldn't do that because, again, I do it all the time, typing something, and it's really hard to navigate. You know, like you can do a push and kind of like tap into a thing, but if something is off screen, it's hard to scroll up there. Whereas if you have this, you can just scroll and it's really easy. It's a nice thing. Press on the key or on the space bar, move or press and hold and move it around. Basically does the same thing. They've gotten to the point where you just don't need it, you know. And to Apple's credit. But at the same time, you know, you're kind of like, it does suck that they had to do that. They found a workaround. It's fine. And it's another thing on this IP thing that, you know, almost anyone, yeah, I mean, you think about the amount of money that Apple and Samsung have, and both of them have patents up the fucking wazoo, and neither one of them can really, they have like essentially limitless lawyers on tap. Unlimited, I mean, you know, de facto unlimited amounts of legal hours. And, you know, most people do not have that. Most people, if you're in a patent thing, you're kind of fucked. In fact, this is why patent trolls exist, because they know, even though they're not in the right, just defending something, if you're in the right, can cost millions of dollars. And so people go like, you know, I don't really want to spend millions of dollars that I don't have on something, so I will just give you a little money. Of course, the problem is that everybody thinks that way, and then the patent trolls get really brazen, and it becomes a massive problem. Similar to insurance, similar to paying people for, you know, like it taking a hospital hostage by encrypting all of their stuff and saying we're going to release your records if you don't pay us. It's the paying The paying everybody, as an individual on a single move, you totally understand why somebody would do that. You totally understand why somebody would vote for Kyrsten Sinema or for Joe Biden, for that matter, as I did both. And I regret the Sinema one. The Biden one, I feel like was a necessary evil, but I definitely don't feel like it was a good thing. I mean, yeah, it's like, I'm not disappointed to see the stuff that he's doing. It's expected, but you do kind of get offended by it. It's just like, why do you fucking people make this shit this way? Like the ACA, I've talked endlessly about it. I'm not going to bore you too much about that, but I mean, the ACA sucks. The ACA, Romney Care, it's just terrible. It's a gift to the insurance industry. It's making them a ton of money. It does get people coverage, but a lot of the coverage is kind of worthless. For a brief period before I had, insurance with my company, before we had a group plan like that, I had an ACA plan. I had actually a handful of different ACA plans over the years. All of them sucked to varying degrees. I tried one that sucked even more, and at a certain point, I lost it because I actually had enough money on a credit card to pay the premium, but they wouldn't let me pay with that. They would only let me pay with cash. And at this time, I just didn't have the cash, and I didn't have any kind of debt facilities to, tap into. I had money coming in a few months, but at the moment I was just fucked. And so I lost it. And once you lose this one, you're like out of the plan. So it was like, I was like freaking out because I have no insurance at the moment. Now I do, luckily. I feel good about that, even though my insurance is not fantastic, but better than the ACA plan that I was on. Lost that insurance, and then I ended up having to go to the doctor for a couple things. And as a cash pay patient, I discovered it was actually cheaper, often, to pay cash than to pay the deductible or to pay the, whatever the copay was with my fucking insurance company. And you start wondering, like, why? I mean, obviously you have the insurance for catastrophe, right? Although even in that case, it's not going to cover everything. You're going to be left in a shit ton of debt. But you're paying a ton of money. And even if you're not paying it, like even if you're subsidized 100%, the government is paying a ton of money to the insurance company for you. And it's insurance that sucks. It's like, they have ridiculously huge deductibles, very stringent limitations, and they're obviously keep getting worse. And yes, the Republicans were making it worse, but the plan from its conception sucked. And it just, and this is not even like Bo where you see the hints of that. It's like you could see when they did it, what they were doing. You could see that the insurance company, the insurance industry, were writing the fucking ACA. You could see that Romney Care sucked. And it's a Heritage fucking Foundation plan. Incidentally, the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society and these guys, like, these are things where, like, no matter how bad you think they are, and trust me, I think they're very awful, but you start peeling back layers on them and they're even worse. It's almost seems impossible that you could be worse than I imagined that either of these things were, but they're fucking terrible. But rolling back, ACA sucked, predictably sucked. And the thing about it is, it's been this massive thing for Republicans to campaign on. And I basically am kind of okay with it in the sense that I know it's better than what we had before, but it's still terrible. But the problem is, like, if it was actual universal health care that didn't suck, you wouldn't be handing a gift to the fucking Republicans. This is the thing that drives me, like, up the fucking wall with the Democrats, because they'll sit there and they'll do shit like this. You have Sinema and Manchin and all these people, Biden, like, we're not even going to do and granted, the public option would be a terrible thing, because basically, predictably what would happen is the insurance companies would take the premiums, and then once you got sick enough not to work, you would lose that insurance. You'd be stuck in the public option. All the people in the public option would become like the ultra high risk pool. And so the cost per person would explode geometrically, and then the thing would fall. It would just collapse under its own weight. It would either, I mean, it would be a combination of like it would suck, it would be underfunded, and then it would just not exist anymore at some point. And then the Republicans would go, see, look at how much socialism sucks. Versus real universal health care, whether it was like an NHS kind of system or, universal insurance, which could actually regulate, what providers were getting and all this kind of stuff. That you have everybody in the same risk pool. You can kind of divide those costs among all the people, including the masses of healthy people. And so the cost per person is reasonable and containable. You can drive costs down and just be so much better. But the ACA contained within it from the inception the seeds of its own destruction. And I just despise this thing that the Democrats do continuously, which is try desperately to placate the Republicans and then get their asses handed to them again. It's like, no shit, of course they're gonna fuck you. They do it every fucking time. Why would you think otherwise? Why are you even trying right now for this infrastructure thing? And part of why they're doing it is, of course, that Biden doesn't mind the Trump tax cuts. He's got a lot of donors that are like, hey, we don't want anything to fundamentally change. Don't make us actually pay money. So, it's not shocking. But the narrative that they have where it's like, oh, we're trying to work with the Republicans, like, they're not going to fucking vote for it. They're not going to, like, the moment that we're in right now, the idea that more than a couple of token people would vote for something, that there would be any kind of bipartisan thing that's on that scale, it's just ridiculous. And yet, so many of these people live in just this delusion where they think, oh, it's like the 70s, where, people are actually reasonable, and the Democrats and Republicans may hate each other kind of on paper, but they, actually get along, and they do a lot of things where they're both working together and all that. No, it's not that. That's gone. That maybe it'll come back one day, but for today, no fucking way in hell. And you keep doing that, it's like, at a certain point, if you keep doing the same shit and you keep getting beaten down, it's bad that somebody's beating you down. Yes. It's bad that the Republicans are terrible. Yes. But this is the thing that drives me insane. You're giving them the fucking ammunition for it. You're handing them the bat that they're using to beat you down. And you're surprised. You're like, oh, here, take this bat. Obviously, we're just gonna work together with it. And then they beat you down. Who could have fucking seen it? Come on. I mean, it's maddening. It's the same shit with the generals when mechanized warfare first started, that would send people, just wave after wave of people, to get mowed down by machine gun fire. And then you're like, can't you see that this is dumb? Like, you can understand the first time you do it, you've never seen it before, and you're like, you should have anticipated it, don't get me wrong, but okay, first time you do it and you're like, oh fuck, this is dumb. And then you go, we're not gonna do that again. We're gonna re-strategize, we're gonna think and come up with an approach that actually might work. But instead, they keep doing the same thing that didn't fucking work, predictably, and never fucking learn. I mean, it's just, I cannot fathom, I cannot understand how people don't get it. And these are people, and I do get, like, okay, if you're Pelosi or you're Schumer or you're Biden, you're people who lived through a big chunk of your life where things were very different. I get it. I get that. I get it. But they've been different for fucking 40 years. Like, basically my entire life, things have been either on a bad trajectory or totally different from the sort of game, the field that you're operating under. The mental model that these people have is utterly detached from the reality on the ground. And they won't fucking learn. They'll keep sending waves of troops in to get mowed down, and they don't give a fuck. And it's just like, at a certain point also, you have to understand that they're either impossibly dumb or they're actively complicit in it. Like, and this is where I got to be, a few years ago when Pelosi absolutely refused to impeach Trump. Tlaib said, we're going to impeach the motherfucker. And they did eventually. But they didn't do it until after Pelosi basically had no fucking choice. And he did something that was just so over the top that, like she just couldn't hold it back. And even when they finally did it, years late, way too late to matter, she restricted the scope so much that it was like very limited to a couple of things that people didn't give that much of a fuck about. And so people saw it and they're like, okay, well, this is, it should have been the greatest hits of all the things that he did. And it's one of these things, and I've talked about this so many times, but, he did so many awful things that I would start listing them, and you start thinking that you are making the shit up. Because it's almost hard to believe that someone could have done this much bad shit. And each one of these things, like every week there'd be something. And that thing would have ended any previous administration. Just done. But he did it, and then the next week you'd forget about it because there's some other fucking horrible thing that's of the same scale. And if you listed them, it seems like you're just full of shit because it's not possible that someone could have done this many terrible things. It's just like, But instead of that, kind of like half-ass impeach him, obviously goes nowhere. Don't use it as a foil to really, like air all of the shit about him. And it actually it probably, if anything, helped them because of the way that they did it. And, again, like if you would have done it earlier and you would have not limited the scope, you might have had a chance to actually persuade people. But instead, all it did was basically feed into these sort of paranoid delusions of, why, they're just doing it to, because they hate him. It's like, no. I mean, Trump derangement syndrome in giant air quotes, this thing, it's like, I do get that you sound deranged if you're talking about the guy, but it's because he's so fucking awful. It's so over the top, ridiculously awful that just enumerating the things that he's done, just reacting normally to it, makes you sound insane. It's fucking brilliant. It's actually, you kind of have to almost admire it in sense of its beauty and simplicity and effectiveness. Who would have thought? Who would have thought that you could do that? And you certainly could have thought that you would do that, incidentally. In retrospect, it's pretty obvious. But people, it's a problem now, this whole sort of shamelessness. And it's funny because people talk endlessly about cancel culture and how people have had their careers ruined by X. Fucking Harvey Weinstein. This is a motherfucker who we know basically drugged and raped a bunch of women. And it was not up for debate. It was like objectively, we know what the fuck the dude did. So many people coming out about it. The stories all overlap. There's so much there that you can tell. He was, months before he went into prison, he was just going to comedy clubs, just hanging out, had to, and not like he was there and people were shunning him and like looking weird at him. He had a fucking table full of people, all chumming around, jerking him off. And when a comedian said something about it, that fucking comedian got ejected from the comedy club, not him. Cancel culture my fucking ass. It's not a thing. I wish it was a thing. I wish there was. And also, like, LeVar Burton had this great thing where he said that it's not a cancel culture, it's a consequence culture. I wish that we really had that consequence culture. I wish that we had that cancel culture because, there are people that need to just have their careers ended. When somebody is that horrible, fucking Mitch McConnell should not be able to go to a restaurant the rest of his life. He should not be able to exist in the public sphere. Kyrsten Sinema should not be able to go to a restaurant. Manchin should not be able to go to a restaurant. It's like, you look at this and you're like, and yet these people just go about their lives and actually not only go about their lives, they're almost actively rewarded for being terrible. Cancel culture my fucking ass. And so, yeah, you have this, and like, I'm gonna end on this because I do have some stuff I have to get to, but Bibi, no longer prime minister. It's been a long fucking time. Took for fucking ever. Awful guy. And then he got replaced with someone who I think is actually worse. Like, how the fuck do you get somebody who's worse than Netanyahu? I mean, I can't fucking fathom it. It's like, how do you do that? I don't even have anything to say about it. It's just so, like, fucked. And I understand, I mean, there are people, the thing that's annoying, and this is a problem, I think this is a fundamental problem with democracy, but you have people who are terrible, and then you have a lot of, probably outnumbering them are good people who do not support terrible shit, but somehow either they're not voting or they're not paying attention or they're not whatever, and then you get the terrible people in, and it's like, I mean, like, cinema should not have a political career. Manchin should not have a political career. Trump should not have a political career. Netanyahu should not have a political career. The current Prime Minister of Israel should not have a fucking political career. Yeah, I mean, and you look at like how this stuff happens. I mean, like in Turkey, the shit that's happened there, and yet it's kind of happened under a democratic process. Like, people have voted to basically make a terrible person even more powerful. Yeah, and I'm not saying, I mean, if you look at Putin, okay, it's not exactly a free and fair election, but also people have basically worked with him there. People have basically given him a vote of confidence. And he keeps, now he's manipulating things too, but he doesn't really have to. I mean, that's the fucked up thing. People like this should not be able, you would hope democracy would not let such people come to power, and if they got in power by accident, you're like, oh, fuck this, and then eject them. Like, a body rejecting your skin rejecting a foreign body, or you've eaten something bad and you just vomit it up. That's what should happen. And yet these people, like Trump, as it stands, Trump could get reelected in 2024. If he doesn't, we're lucky. Like, and if it's not him, somebody equally terrible could easily do it. And yet, we're basically like, how is that even possible? Like, how do people, I don't know. I don't know how people can keep doing it. And I don't think individually people are that bad, but when you see collectively the decisions that people make and the stuff that they do to each other, and just like, I mean, it's awful. It really, I'm not saying it makes me lose my faith in humanity, but it definitely gives you some pause, because you're sitting there like, I mean, maybe you hairless apes fucking suck ass, because this is what you're doing is not good. If there was, I mean, I'm not a religious person. If there were some kind of afterlife and consequences and all this stuff, and some, judge sitting on high kind of going like, this is not good, you'd almost want that, because what you've got now is just like so fucking awful. And the terrible people are rewarded immensely for being terrible. I mean, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, these are people who, both of them come from money. Both of them have this narrative about them, though, that's like, oh, I brought myself up from my bootstraps and I got to become like a couple hundred billionaire just of my own gumption. And you motherfuckers. Emerald Mine, few $100,000 loan from your parents. I mean, it's just like, come on. And there's just something so awful when you know people who actually are in financial hardship and distress and all this kind of stuff. And I've said, I've had periods in my life where I had no money at all. Like, basically just I've luckily not ever been homeless. I've never had to, get public assistance or any of this stuff. But if I didn't have a sister who had money, if I didn't have some savings that I could have tapped, I no longer have that, but at one point I had that I could tap into, I'd have been fucked. And a lot of people don't have those things. And a lot of people are fucked. And, you see that, and then you see this bullshit narrative with these people. Like, oh, yeah, it's totally their own doing. I mean, no. Yeah, and it's annoying also because you hear people talk about these guys with a certain respect and admiration. And it's like, well, you might not agree with how they did it, but you got to give them that they did it. And it's like, yeah, kind of. I mean, I don't know. But Musk, I mean, he's got so much going for him in terms of resources, and he's got the backing of terrible people. And I do feel bad about having a car because, you look at the stuff that he's doing and it's just like, yeah, why? I feel bad about feeling good and excited about SpaceX because he's such a terrible person. And, it's like, I'm so conflicted because part of me is like, yeah, this is awesome what they're doing. And part of me is like, Jesus fucking Christ, he's one of the worst people in the world. Should not exist. Should not, okay, maybe he exists. Maybe awful people do exist. But they should just be disempowered and nobody should listen to them. They shouldn't be a couple hundred billionaire, So on that cheerful note, watch Bo inside. Hopefully this wasn't too much blathering, but felt somewhat cathartic. I liked it. It's crazy. So thank you. Say Jen.